Do you need your diaper changed? Nanny asked as the restraints were undone. No, Charlotte replied quietly. She let out a little involuntary burp as she climbed down from the chair. She didn't know where she was going to go, but she definitely wanted to put space between her and the robot. Charlotte had barely taken a single step when she felt a metallic hand grab her arm. She rolled her eyes like an annoyed teenager as she came to a stop. Hey! Charlotte whined loudly. Nanny reached down with her free hand and pressed Charlotte's diaper against her crotch. Charlotte winced as the soggy padding was pushed up between her legs and the nanny assessed the state of the diaper. Charlotte tried to pull away, but the nanny picked Charlotte up without a word and carried her over to the changing table. The journalist hated the fact that the nanny wasn't even talking to her, it was just manipulating her however it wanted, and Charlotte was forced to go along with it. There still seemed to be no way to get out, and Charlotte was feeling increasingly hopeless. The Odyssey was unsnapped and the wet diaper was exposed. The nanny wasted no time in lowering the front of the diaper and starting the cleaning process. Charlotte didn't fight it, she just let the nanny do her job, and at least she would end up in a dry diaper. She could barely believe she was thinking that. Time for re-education, Nanny said as taped up a new diaper around the young woman's hips. Huh? Charlotte was confused by this. It didn't seem in keeping with the whole babyish aesthetic. Charlotte was carried back over to the high chair and sat back down. Before she could work out what was happening, she found her legs tied to the chair's legs. Charlotte's wrists swiftly followed. What's going on? Stop this, Charlotte said in a panicked voice. The nanny remained silent. She just restrained Charlotte to the chair and turned it to face the television. Charlotte was nervous, and that only got worse when Nanny walked behind her. Reaching around from behind, Charlotte saw Nanny's arm shoving a pacifier into her mouth. Unlike the pacifier that Charlotte spat out, this one was firmly strapped to her head. Finally, and stopping any and all chances of movement, Charlotte felt a leather strap against her forehead that forced her head back against the chair. It was pulled so tightly that Charlotte was forced to look straight ahead. She was unable to turn her head away from the screen or move a muscle. The nanny walked in front of Charlotte and to the television. She switched it on and followed a series of buttons through the many menus until it came to a channel that, for the moment, just showed static. Be a good girl and watch the pretty cartoons, Nanny said. Nanny turned and left the room. The odd silence descended on Charlotte as she struggled to move a muscle. She could do little more than blink, and it was very worrying for her. Until you have been tied down in such a way, it is impossible to know how vulnerable it feels. After a minute, the static disappeared and was replaced with a cartoon of talking animals. There didn't seem anything more to it. It was just a show for babies, something a mother leaves on when she needs some time alone. It seemed harmless, even if after half an hour it was seemingly numbing Charlotte's brain. There was only so many times she could watch these childish characters sing and dance before it started giving her a headache. Charlotte tried shouting but found the pacifier made it impossible for her to make any more than a low mumble. She could close her eyes, but she couldn't block out the awful high-pitched voices that rang out from the speakers. After an indeterminate amount of time, it felt like hours but was probably 1 hour at most, Charlotte noticed the pictures on the television changed slightly. She noticed occasional flashing, only a frame here and there, but just enough for Charlotte to notice. Time seemed to cease having meaning. Charlotte felt like she was going mad as more and more subtle changes happened on the screen. Was the cartoon changing, or was she just going crazy? The picture and sound seemed to speed up slightly, almost imperceptibly, and then slow down again. A couple of times Charlotte was sure that scenes repeated or were taken from different episodes and seemingly randomly placed in others. Charlotte had no way of knowing how much time had passed, but she did eventually feel her bladder asking to empty. All that milk had to come out sometime, and with no sign of her release coming soon, Charlotte tried to relax as best she could. After just a few seconds of relaxing, she found her padding getting increasingly wet. She almost surprised herself at how easily she started peeing, and she soon found herself sitting in a puddle of her own urine. As the hot liquid soaked into the diaper around her, Charlotte frowned as it sounded like the cartoon briefly dipped into a foreign language. It wasn't something she recognized, and as soon as she noticed it, the cartoon seemed to go back to English. She hated the feeling of not knowing if she was going mad or if this building was trying to play with her mind. More and more time passed. It had to have been hours by now, or maybe it wasn't. Time no longer has meaning when you are unable to move a muscle. The cartoons were still playing, and they still seemed to change in ways to mess with Charlotte. Sometimes there would be no weirdness for a long time, and then suddenly, just as Charlotte questioned her own sanity, it would start again. It was a long time coming, but Charlotte started noticing a full feeling in her bowels. The horrible mush she had eaten that morning, at least she assumed it had been morning, had gone through her system. Charlotte tried yelling again, but obviously could make little more than muffled yelp. Her bowels were cramping strongly and quickly. Charlotte wondered if something in the food was making it harder for her to hold on. Charlotte couldn't move her arms or legs, but if she wriggled in just the right way, she could lift her padded butt off the chair slightly. The thought of trying not to soil herself barely existed in her mind. It felt like it was inevitable at this point. Had the cartoons changed how she thought, or had she just given up? Either way, Charlotte lifted herself up the couple of inches available to her and felt her cheeks blazing red under the gag. She felt her eyes tearing up as the effort of lifting her body up also forced her to push down with her tummy muscles.